So here we are with one of our favorite species in the Lowcountry, and that is obviously the alligator. And of course, this guy's really cute, but they get a little more intimidating as they get bigger.
Absolutely.
But tell us why they are important to our ecosystem, because I think people think, maybe they're just a carnivore. What is their purpose? And because they really do have one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we can start off from when they're hatchling to the point where they're 13 feet long and invading our big retention ponds, right? At this size, we're talking about a food resource. A lot of birds, fish, even other alligators are consuming these young at this age and doing it quite frequently. There's probably not a lot of these guys that are making it from hatchling all the way to full adulthood without running that gambit. And then
it's just interesting because we so often talk about the sea turtles and how many of them don't make it from being a hatchling, but you think of an alligator as top of the chain.
Yeah,
so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But we say that when they're this large, but as they exceed that 7-8 foot, they definitely become just that, right? They're the untouchable animal that not many of other animals are going to mess with outside of themselves. And then once they're at that age, they're really controlling that ecosystem, right? They're feeding on a ton of food sources, from raccoons to rodents, turtles, birds, you name it. So really being that keystone species and maintaining that status quo, that equilibrium, if you will, in that environment. On top of that, in their natural setting, these guys are ecosystem engineers. They are building these deep burrows, digging out like swamps and these shallow kind of impoundment type areas, and creating a water resource, a refuge for other animals. So really, really important to that ecosystem as a whole. I think these guys definitely get a bad rap, right? At 13 feet, respect is key. These guys are formidable. They are the top predator in the area, right? We are finding ourselves having more and more interactions as we are continuously developing wetlands and moving into this low country area. We're giving them resources and retention ponds for them to move into. And oftentimes we're not maintaining those retention ponds for the betterment of these animals, right? We're doing it for our views, and in turn we're having more and more interactions with these guys.
Yeah, so like you said, respect is key for sure, but fascinating that they are so important to our environment around here. Who knew?
Yeah.
You did, but thanks for sharing it with us.
Of course.
So now we have been joined by a diamondback terrapin turtle. We talk all the time about the loggerhead turtles, but we have a lot of these guys around too. So tell us about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, loggerheads and our sea turtles are getting most of the glory in this area. But to be quite honest, these are probably one of the most beautiful turtles in North America, and they're not ever talked about in this area. We have them quite abundant in our salt marshes, and quite uniquely, this is actually the only turtle that we have year-round in our salt marshes. So as sea turtles are coming in the summertime to lay eggs, you'll see the occasional juvenile in the wintertime coming through, but these guys are here year-round. They're living in our small tidal creeks. They're feeding on periwinkle snails and fiddler crabs, and they are thriving out here. They're very similar to sea turtles. They have a way to excrete salt out of their body. So they have a different mechanism to do so. But yeah, they survive in this full saline water. And as you can see, they are absolutely stunning. We're actually doing a project right now with USCB to do some sampling of these animals. So finding out where they are and what abundance they exist in our area, doing some road mortality work out on the Sea Island Parkway. So as these guys are coming on land to lay eggs, right, they're inevitably coming in contact with humans and roadways at that. So kind of getting a better understanding of how these guys are doing in this environment. They're definitely a sentinel species, right? They exist in these small tidal creeks for their whole life, and if anything happens, anything changes within those systems, right, it has a direct effect on these guys.
So right now they're thriving, but we want to make sure that stays that way.
Well, we think they're thriving. We really don't know. That's when these guys are so cryptic. When they're in these creeks, all you see is their eyes and that nose pop up, and that's just about it. You can imagine this being in the water kind of disappears and blends in. They hear noise or see movement, they disappear. So I imagine many people go their whole lives in a salt marsh and, you know, see these guys on occasion, you know, but not too often. We know that for many years this was a big food resource. So terrapin is essentially translates to edible turtle. So we were consuming these guys, but we really don't even know as to what frequency we were eating them. So there weren't much records being kept.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for sharing this beautiful creature.